All right, good morning. Today we have a man that needs no introduction, but who I will introduce anyways. Mr. Joe Buck, broadcaster on Fox Sports, son of Jack Buck, legendary Cardinals and Hall of Fame announcer. And I even took a step further and looked at who you're named after, your grandfather, who was an incredible NFL athlete as well. So, Joe, welcome in this morning. We appreciate you coming in to talk.
Yeah, I mean, not only was I named after my grandfather, who I'm very proud played in the NFL for George Halas and the Chicago Bears, but he was also a Navy veteran, a World War II veteran. My father was a World War II veteran and somebody who earned a Purple Heart in Germany after being shot. So there are a lot of tie-ins for me to talk to you today, Brant, and I just want to. This is not my podcast. This is your podcast, and I'll talk about anything you want. But let me just say how proud I am of you, of a young man who's doing things in honor of his late brother that I think would just astound Matt Brewer. And for you to take the initiative to do this and to be able to communicate about your brother the way that you have and you continue to do is just stunning to me. So it's more than I could do at that time in my life. You're a young guy, but I am just absolutely beyond impressed. So whatever you want to talk about, I'm here to talk about it. And since the topic is Matt Brewer, I'm real excited to talk about anything you want to go with.
Absolutely. And it's funny you say he would be astounded, but at the same time, knowing Matt, he would be so embarrassed to have all this attention, to have all this attention on him. And but to that point, I'm happy to do it. It's to carry on his legacy, to talk about him, and really just bring light to mental health awareness and to support our veterans is quite awesome. And Joe, I think you hyped me up a little too much, but we'll go into let's see. What people don't know is kind of how you and I know each other and the relationships that our families have. So Joe, if you wouldn't mind, why don't you kind of touch on, I guess, that relationship between you and my brother and my brother and your father?
Yeah, it was really a unique, special relationship that Matt had with my father and with my mom. It's not just my dad, but with my mom as well. And it really happened initially right before Matt's father, Tim, passed away. My mom was very involved with Central Presbyterian Church in St. Louis, and forever we were dear friends of the Jumper family, and they were the longtime pastor, Andy Jumper, at Central Press. And then when Tim Brewer came along, it was just kind of revolutionary listening to this incredible speaker, somebody who you could identify with. I used to go and just sit, as I've already used this enough in this podcast, but I was in awe of watching him speak to a congregation. Just a brilliant man and a brilliant speaker. And so that he had this beautiful little boy named Matt. And I think it was only natural that my mom being as involved as she was with Central Press, Matt being the son of the pastor there was always going to be this little cordial relationship. But when Tim passed away, I feel like my dad and my mom kind of made it their calling to a certain degree to fill the void for this young boy named Matt. And so here I was in my early 20s, just starting out my career, Cardinal broadcaster, and I saw this relationship develop. And it was great for me to see as somebody who was about to be a young father myself, my dad kind of step into that void. And my dad would take Matt down to the ballpark. Matt was kind of his little buddy. And they had kind of these trips down to Busch Stadium and other places. It wasn't just take this kid to work day for my dad. It was just a part of my mom and dad's life. And I'm not sure why, other than they felt like it was the right thing to do. And Matt was such a beautiful little boy. I mean, it was like a Norman Rockwell painting. He was just a kid that you know, if you were drawing up a blonde-haired, cute little American boy, that's who you would draw. And so I saw this relationship develop, and I saw a lot of love going both ways, not just my mom and dad toward Matt, but Matt toward my mom and dad. And he became kind of a de facto part of our family for a while there. And boy, I'm glad he did.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that, obviously I was, your dad gave me the nickname Willie B. I'm not sure if you remember that, but he gave me the nickname Willie B. That's about the only thing I remember. But
I mean, you had to be young. How old?
I was really young. I don't remember him at all, but I remember the stories that were told, and of just the man of who he was. And, you know, like you said, how he just stepped in, filled that void, and was such an incredible person to my brother, who, you know, helped shape him to be the man that he was. So yeah, for that, you know, I didn't know your father personally. I guess we'd met before I could remember, but you know, an exceptional human. And yeah, so I mean, that's awesome. And hearing it from your perspective is definitely something that I was looking forward to hearing as well.
Yeah, I as you said, I do think, without making it too self-serving and serving of my own dad, I do think that my dad had part who Matt eventually became. And nobody knew at that time. He was just a little boy who had just lost his father and was going through tremendous heartache and probably wondering why his world had been turned on its head. But I know that my dad put a lot of time and love. My mom put a lot of time and love into helping wherever they could. And then to fast forward and see, you know, what Matt became, whether it was a linebacker, a football player at Lafayette, or in the Naval Academy, or a boxer, which my dad loved boxing, or, you know, what he did in the Marine Corps. I mean, on and on and on. And, you know, then signing up to be a firefighter. It just was it was a life of service. And I think that probably was instilled in Matt in a lot of different ways. It wasn't just my dad, but my dad was there as somebody to serve Matt. Even when my dad was not a young guy at that time, he was an older man, and but knew that it was something that he needed to do and wanted to do. And my dad was big into being a servant in many different ways. And I saw that as a kid, and consequently so did Matt. And it became part of who I am, and it became part of who Matt was.
Absolutely. Most definitely. And, you know, just hearing the way that you talk about your father, and hearing the way that other people speak about him, my mother, my parents included, I think that is definitely safe to say, you know, that Jack, Buck, and Carol, your mom, played an incredible part in Matt's life. And, you know, one that, it's unfortunate because, like you said, he was a protector. He was a server. He served others his whole life, but, you know, he never really looked inwards to kind of serve himself, and get his own things, and get his own you know, mental health struggles figured out. So, and it's interesting to see that develop in a person, you know, someone who lays their life and puts everyone else above themselves, but forgetting the importance of, you know, keeping your own mental health strong as well.
Yeah, I think it's the age-old example of the giving tree, in a book that we all had read to us when we were little. And then when I became a young father, it was a book that I read to my daughters. And it's something that I'll read to my sons, who are now 3 years old, and twin boys. I just think it is a great story about this tree that serves these different roles over time for this young boy who becomes a young man, who becomes an older adult, who becomes an old man, and there's just nothing left. And that's kind of how I feel about Matt. In some ways, that's how I felt about my dad, who was dealing with Parkinson's and diabetes and all these different ailments, and yet the day of lung cancer in the end, which is what ended up killing him, But the night before he went into the hospital, and basically his last night on earth outside of the walls of Barnes Hospital, with a 1 or 2 day exception, he did a banquet, and he did a banquet, Missouri Athletic Club, and left downtown St. Louis and drove to Barnes Hospital, and that was it. And it was kind of a heartbreaking way for my dad's life to end, but also a fitting way, because there was just no end to what he would do to help and just kind of say, yeah, I'll do it. And I feel like that's how Matt was. And there's no doubt in my mind that living example that Matt saw through being around my father sunk in. Now, there were a lot of other influences in Matt. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, he has this wonderful mom and, friends and family and all that. But there was a little piece of that soup that became Matt Brewer that my dad was throwing some spice into and saying, here, this is how you serve people. And I do think that sunk in.
Absolutely. And, just drawing the kind of the parallels between, their lives. And this was talked about in the funeral, and we'll go at that in a little bit, but, your father brought Matt to the fire station in St. Louis when they were younger. So I remember my mother telling me this story after Matt passed, and he wrote down in his journal, or when he went to his school, I think it was 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, he wrote down, when I grow up one day, I'm going to be a firefighter because of the trip that your dad took him on. And then fast forwarding, talking about your dad in a banquet and serving people right before he died, that's what Matt ended up doing. He went to the military, and he got out to kind of, I think, and I'll be able to talk to him about this someday, but I think to find a more normal life in the real normal world, but he had to serve people, he had to help others. So right before his passing, he was accepted to be a firefighter in Kansas City. So just drawing the two parallels and talk about someone who really changed his life. I mean, he did 100%.
Yeah. And that is, you want to talk about the funeral. I just sat there in tears. I sat there in awe and of the stories and getting to know Matt more, even through the stories that you told, the stories that your mom told, right on down the line, and going, oh my God, this little boy that, I think when I think of Matt Brewer, I think of a little boy. And, just like you think of anybody's kid, and all of a sudden they show up one day at a Christmas party and the kid is not a kid anymore. The kid's, 25 and getting married or something. It's like I'll think of you as like this little boy. So now I have this mental picture of this young, beautiful Matt Brewer, and then hearing the stories at the funeral of what he made of his life. I mean, he packed a full lifetime's worth of activity into a very short window of time. And there are a lot of parallels between my dad and your brother. And I just know that my dad would have been, and I'm sure is, so proud of whom Matt became and what he made of himself and the opportunities he took and the advantage of the opportunities, but then making his own. And that was kind of how my dad, lived his life. It's one thing to get a chance. It's another thing to take that chance and then make it into something big and something impactful. And that's exactly what Matt did. So again, the parallels between the two are evident.
Absolutely. And, just talking on that and in the behalf, and I guess that funeral is really, I didn't know it at the time because I was obviously all very new and raw, but I mean, it was the first time I think where I took it upon myself to not only share his legacy, but I mean, you were there, and it wasn't a funeral that just talked about what Matt did good in his life. It was a funeral that addressed the deepest, darkest part of his life, which was the end. And, when I talked about depression and someone who, looks, like you said, the way he was described in his funeral as this guy who had done so much in 30 years and who had so much to look forward to, someone like that, who many people view as a superhero, as unbreakable, was. And so, yeah, that was, I mean,
and that's an example too. I mean, you see this superhero, this larger than life figure, And then he realized that when he went home at night, he was dealing with things. And, you know, we all hold people like that up. Same with my dad, same with anybody. They all have things that they're dealing with, and nobody really knows the depth of that until somebody either, you know, talks about it, seeks help, you know, has the willingness to be vulnerable and say, I know you see one thing, but here's how I really feel inside. That's hard to do. And it's hard for these, you know, these studly type people to say, I'm not perfect and I'm weak here and I need help. And these are people that never ask for help. These are people that get help asked of them. And that's, I think, the bigger part of this. That's that it's okay to talk about being fragile. It's okay to talk. I mean, I haven't done 1/80th of the things that Matt did, but I'm very open about talking about going through divorce, going through depression, getting on antidepressants, talking to a psychologist, talking to a psychiatrist, and trying to open myself up to people that can give me a fresh way to look at things and can say, hey, you know, let's step back and look at the bigger picture here. And that's, I think, what you're trying to do, without me putting words, you know, assigned to your mission.
You can do
I think
that.
you're trying,
Sorry.
yeah, I think you're trying to say these are larger than life people who are people like me and you, and they're not perfect, and it's okay to, nobody's perfect. There's only one, and you know, I think it's okay to show vulnerability, and if you can show vulnerability, I think that's in some ways one of the most heroic things you can do, that you can say, I need help. And I don't care what you do for life. I don't care what you've done. It doesn't matter what the reason is for your struggle. Just saying, hey, I need help is a heroic thing in and of itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And to just, I guess, piggyback on what you were saying, I mean, that's absolutely our goal. And the purpose of this podcast, this interviews, is to get people who are larger than life. And some people think, you know, these badass veterans, you know, these huge football players who everyone thinks that they have everything going for them. No one does. And everyone has those issues. And that's why it needs to be talked about, and it needs to be in the light, because there's not one person on this earth who doesn't deal with shit in some sort of capacity. Everyone does. Every person.
Yeah, I've never understood that. I've never understood why, if somebody has something as severe as a broken arm, you put a cast on it. If somebody has something internal, cancer, whatever it may be, you go through whatever treatment you can find. You go through chemotherapy, you go through radiation. If somebody has mental health, it's almost like this thing like, oh, don't talk about that. Oh, don't talk about, you know, needing guidance, be it from a clinical psychologist, spiritual, whatever it may be, whatever makes you whole again. But it's always been just confounding to me that somehow that's a sign of weakness. I think the message has to be that is a sign of strength, to admit publicly that you need assistance, whether it's a cast for a broken arm, radiation or chemotherapy, or mental health assistance, that's the right thing to do. And there should be no stigma attached to that, especially for people who give and give and give and give, and they're that giving tree, and all that's left is a stump. The beauty of mental health assistance and and the awareness of it, and the admittance of needing some assistance, is that, unlike the giving tree, you can start to build that stump back into a tree again.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference between that book by Shel Silverstein and what life can provide and help can provide, is all of a sudden that stump gets a little bit taller. And then it gets a little bit taller than that. And then the branches start to grow back out. And then the leaves start to come out again. And maybe it's somebody back from being overseas and seeing things that the rest of us would never want to see. And they can't get that out of their head. And they want to talk about it with people who also have done similar tours or have seen similar things. And then all of a sudden that you start to stand a little bit taller, if not in reality, at least internally, you start standing taller, and then you start building yourself back up. So, you know, what you're doing, what you're saying, I think everybody needs a dose of this, and nobody's living a perfect life. So getting off that kind of narcissistic trail, to be harsh about it, and saying, I need somebody to talk to, is the best thing anybody can do for themselves, whether they've been in battle or they've been just living life in the Midwest. It doesn't matter. And we all need it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the point, you know, you said there's nothing stronger a man can do than to talk about his mental health, because there's people relying on you. You know, there's people that look up to you. There's people that you have to support, and there's people that love you. And in Matt's case, I wish that he knew that. And I think that he knows that now, or I know that he knows that now. So there's nothing.
I always think this, Brant, for anybody that takes their own life, and there are, you know, that's what we're dealing with here with Matt. There are, and I've been to plenty of funerals, unfortunately, where that's the case. And you sit there and you go, if they could have just fast forwarded to this part to see how many people they've touched, to see how revered they are, to see. So that's a lesson for the rest of us too, is to let somebody know how much they're appreciated when they are appreciated. It's not just on them. It's on us to say, sometimes it's on somebody else to put a hand on a shoulder and say, hey, are you doing okay? You know, hey, and that's not signing it has nothing to do with Matt's specific case. I'm just talking generally.
Yeah.
That's on the rest of us to go, hey,
well
I see
Joe,
you're struggling here.
Joe, I'll be honest. Like, I mean, talk about vulnerable, like, and what I've said and what I've told my mom since the beginning, you know, the devil will try to put thoughts in your head. I could have done this. I could have done that. The reality is there's nothing that would have changed that circumstance, in that particular circumstance. So with that being said, you know, in the whole mental health stigma, there's times where, you know, I mean, I didn't know the severity of Matt's case, but there's times where I knew something was wrong, but because of how uncomfortable at the time I felt talking about mental health and bringing up these things, that I wouldn't ask. But now, because of what happened, that will never happen again. And you can ask any of my friends or anyone else. I'm always, you know, you seem off. Like, they know I'm okay. No, you're not okay. You know, tell me about what's going on. And to get that, so I won't tell you my friend's name, but, you know, he was struggling with the relationship that he had in his life, and we got to talking, and I was like, dude, like, I've been through that. I've had those exact same experiences. Like, this is what I did. This is resource you can go and look at. And because of what happened to my brother, now, because my life has been changed so much, now I will never let an opportunity like that pass again, to pat someone on the back.
I think of the times that I saw Matt recently, and I think I knew something was off. That wasn't Matt Brewer. That wasn't the kid that I saw. And I know that came and went. And so you cannot play that game. You cannot play that. That doesn't work. It doesn't do any good. It doesn't.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
All you do is learn from it. And again, there's Matt being an example for the rest of us in this heartbreaking fashion. But yet, you know, like you said, you reach out to people. It's why a psychologist and a psychiatrist both told me when I was going through divorce and in the depths of as depressed as I've ever been, worrying about my kids, and the age-old line is just like they say on an airplane: when the cabin loses pressure, the air masks drop down, put yours on first, and then assist your kids, assist the kids around you. You have to make yourself as strong as you can be for those around you. And that includes mental health. That's not just physical strong. That is, get yourself to the best possible place mentally. Talk about it. When I go and talk to a therapist, I walk out of that office and I feel 10 pounds lighter.
Yep.
The music sounds better in my car. The windows rolled down and the air on my face feels better than it did with me driving there. The phone conversations I have on Bluetooth, for safety's sake, are more fulfilling. I come back in a better mood. There is a lightness that happens when you talk about what's bothering you. So yes, it's on those around us to say, hey, are you doing okay? Sure, that's a given. But it's also on you. If you're struggling, you have to reach out and say, I need help. And that has to come, as we've said already a number of times on this podcast, that has to come with no stigma. That has to come with an initiative to say, I need help. And that should be a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely, Joe. And, as we begin to build up others and create a platform for people to feel more comfortable, that's going to raise, and the whole purpose of this is to raise awareness, to raise funding, so that there's more things for people to go and seek help for. There's examples, which there's already plenty out there, but there's people that other people know that have gotten help, that have gotten fixed. And that's my life's mission, is to help this nation's, not only this nation's veterans and the people we talked about earlier, those big badass dudes, but just like you said, an ordinary kid from Midwest who needs to hear this message. And I struggle with mental health. Joe Buck struggles with mental health. He struggles with mental health. Everyone struggles.
Yeah.
And that's the message that we're putting out there. And I'm just excited to see more people get help, and for more people to, although it's uncomfortable right now, to like you said, pat someone on the back, ask if they're okay, get to those deeper questions.
That's well said, because I think really connecting with somebody, it's kind of a lost art. I think with everybody buried in their phones, we're all coming out of a pandemic where everybody was, just isolated and on their own, which was another factor in what happened with Matt specifically. Yep. But asking questions, not just, hey, how you doing? It's like, how are you doing? And really listen to the answer, and listen to the words that are said, and listen to how they're said, and really go to the next level. It's not just, hey, what's up? It's, hey, how are you? Not, it can even come with a different inflection. It doesn't have in your voice. It's not, hey man, how you doing? That elicits a different response than, hey, what's up? Hey, what's up gets a, hey, not much, just hanging out, doing my thing. But if you say, hey, how are you? That, at least to me, if I heard somebody say that, I'd say, I'm doing good, or I'm worried about this, or I'm worried about this. And it's not in a public setting. It's not at a party, like, hey, what's up? But it's just in a quiet time where you reach across from outside the little dome of your phone. And, we're all just so isolated, even before the pandemic, of just in your own world of looking down and using your thumbs and texting and not talking. And, you're on an elevator, and when I was a kid, you'd have to kind of look at people as you got into the elevator. People's heads were up. Now you get on an elevator, everybody's head's down. You have no idea who's getting on the elevator, who's getting off. You didn't make any contact with anybody. And so I would say, make it a point to make eye contact with people, not just your best friends, but make eye contact with people and let them know you're in the world with them. Hi there, how are you? And I try like crazy to make sure that I am not head buried, because it's really easy to just kind of get off in your own world, and that can't be anymore. I think we really need to make an effort collectively to put our heads up and acknowledge other people that are in the world, not just your friends.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even with the pandemic, and even those a year, that changed culture forever. And like you said, if someone, how are you? If someone says, I'm all right, Okay, let's look deeper into that. Why aren't you good today? Like, why are you just all right? Well, and then that leads to a conversation, that could end up saving someone's life. And that's the whole purpose of this. And, I've always said if this helps save one person's life, the 30-day challenge, and us talking, and it's all worth it. And
it's a real thing. It's not just lip service. It's a real thing. And that's what, and for some reason, when you hear mental health, the automatic jump is, oh, well, I'm not crazy. Well, now it's about how at peace are you and how well are you processing what's happening in your life? Because we've all got stuff. I don't care who it is. I did a show for DirecTV called Undeniable, and I sat across from Derek Jeter and Michael Phelps and Wayne Gretzky and right on down the line. Everybody has dealt with self-doubt. Everybody has dealt with a moment where they thought all that they had built up was going to go down the drain. Everybody has dealt with, whether it's substance abuse in the case of Michael Phelps and going through rehab and being just brought down to, forget the gold medals. The gold medal, at the end of the day, the gold medals don't mean anything. At the end of the day, it's about how are you doing and how are you hopefully thriving in the world? And if not, how can you better thrive in the world and feel better about yourself? And these people are at the top of their profession and adored and, multimillionaires, and none of that matters when it all goes south. And a lot of times to the outside world, it's not going south, but in here, in your mind, it is. And that's when you have to reach out and say, I need to talk to somebody, whether it's your buddy or it's a clinically trained professional. And that's, I think, what needs to happen. It has to go from just a casual conversation to a conversation with a really good person who can help navigate somebody through a really dark time.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't have said better myself. And I love the example of the airplane and putting your mask on first, because at the end of the day, and the whole point of this is, if you don't get help, if you don't help save yourself and build yourself up, then you can't help others. And it's just going to end up affecting others in a negative way.
Yeah. Case in point, that, heartbreaking funeral, and listening to you talk about your brother, listening to your mom talk about her son. And, that's the lasting impression I have. Like, not what could I have done, but just the overall, it didn't have to get here. And if there's awareness there, and if, as you said, Brant, and I think so well, if all of these efforts by you leads to one person getting help and avoiding sitting in that church the way that we all sat in that church for Matt, then it's all worth it. And I couldn't say it better myself, and I couldn't be more proud of what you're doing, because one person's life is worth so much. And so good for you that you're picking up the baton and kind of carrying it on for old number 38 there over your right shoulder. That's what your calling is. And I know you idolized your brother, and you continue to in the best possible way, and carry on that legacy of reaching out and helping people, which he did to no end.
Absolutely. And yeah, and I feel incredibly fortunate, which, not a lot of people would think in this circumstance, but to be able to help build others up. And God has given me the strength, and like you said, the purpose to continue to do that. And, although Matt is, I have a dog tag tattooed on my back. I did that when he was alive. So, and it's on a crown of thorns next to a cross. And Matt would always joke, he's like, dude, you can't put me up there next to God. And I said, that's fair. It's a good point. But, that's how much I loved him and looked up to him, and still do. But it's not just about him. And it's about others. And it's about, like you said, saving that one person's life. So, yeah. So, Joe, this was amazing. Thank you so much for talking to us today. Just thank you for being vulnerable and continuing to do so. I'm so excited to help save some lives with you. And, if you want, why don't you talk a little bit about your podcast, Daddy Issues, before I let you go?
Well, I mean, it kind of speaks to everything we're talking about. I do it with Oliver Hudson. His mom is, excuse me, his mom is Goldie Hawn, who, you're a young guy, so you don't, but I'm old enough to know how big of a deal she was and is in Hollywood. His stepdad is Kurt Russell. His sister is Kate Hudson. His brother's Wyatt Russell. He's got a lot of people around him with a lot of success. And yet here he is kind of hoping and to make his career what he always wanted it to be. And so he also had a father who left him when he was under 10 years old. And he had Kurt Russell step into the void of kind of this missing father figure. And what I like about it is we've talked to, Eddie Vedder and Adam Sandler and David Spade and Jason Bateman and Matthew McConaughey. And you realize, again, just like that show I talked about on the DirecTV, everybody's got stuff that they deal with, and everybody's got a dad story. My daddy issues are all born out of great stuff. I just have this tremendous example to try to live up to that my dad set out there for me. Oliver's situation is a lot different than mine, but we all have a dad somewhere, and everybody's story is varied on how they look back on their childhood and what they got from their dad, and then consequently what it's like to be a dad in 2021. And I've got 25 and 22-year-old daughters and 3-year-old twin boys. Oliver's got 2 boys and a girl kind of right in the middle of all that. And it's like, how are you navigating the things that your oldest boy is now being confronted with in the case of Oliver? Or I've kind of been there, done that, and now my girls the next chapter. Or I've got these little boys, and what are they going to be facing when they're 5, 6, 10, 12, 15 years old? And so there's plenty to talk about. It's been really a rewarding experience for me. And again, another reminder that everybody's got stuff that they're dealing with. And I think that's kind of the message that you and I are both sending out there. No matter what you've accomplished, no matter what you've done, no matter how much money you have or how much fame you have or how many medals you have on your chest, we're all vulnerable. We're all going through things every day. And that's kind of what the podcast is about. And that's really what it boils down to with this podcast as well. So it kind of fits into what I talk about every week when I'm on with Oliver and a guest. And so it's a real thing. This is not just something to talk about on a podcast. It's a real thing. And so I'm proud that you're doing this, Brant.
Absolutely. And when I'm as big as Matthew McConaughey is one day, maybe I'll get
there you go.
I'll get a feature on the show.
I mean, he's a beauty. He was sitting there with his hair slicked back and these crazy looking glasses on, and he's got philosophy and theories on everything in life. But for all the bluster and kind of all the cutesy, folksy stuff that he does, he's got a great message. And he's got, it has to start with you, whether it's about the political situation in this country, it's about mental health in this country, it's whatever it is, race relations in this country. It has to start with you. You can't just keep throwing rocks and going, this stinks, you're wrong. It has to start with you. And once it does, if it starts with you and everybody and really listening to somebody, which nobody does anymore, then I think good things can happen. And that's really what that conversation and what he's all about now. I mean, he's going to run for governor of Texas, and I think he's got even bigger dreams than that. So who knows? Hey,
I'm in Texas. I'm in Texas now. I'll vote for him.
There you go. Yeah. Well, he's got a message, and I said to him, you have to really hope that people listen to what you're saying, because the typical political rhetoric, there hasn't been a lot of room for it starts with you. And he's not really big into, are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? Are you a right-wing radical? Are you a, liberal, radical? It's more about living in the middle. And that's kind of his message. So he's going to have to hope that people really listen. But I think, he's got half of it down. He knows how to communicate, and I think he'll do well.
Yeah, it looks great. Like I said, I'll vote for him.
All right, good. I'll tell him.
Awesome. All right, Joe. Well, yeah, just that last point, people listening, I really hope people take the time to listen to this conversation today, because there's some some wonderful things we talked about. And, it's just getting to say that one person. I'm excited to do this with you. So I really appreciate your time today, Joe. And, this won't be the last conversation we have. So take care and enjoy Mexico. Go soak in those suns and listen to those waves.
Yeah. Well, hey, listen, just like I said, my dad would be and is proud of Matt. I know he would feel the same and does about what you're doing. So for Willie B, from my dad, good for you. And you're making everybody in your little close circle very proud, carrying the banner for 38 forward, and having conversations that are sometimes tough to have and very emotional for you personally, but you're making a big difference. So congratulations.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
All right, Brant, be well.
All right, brother. Take care.
You too. Bye.
Yeah.